Okay, so good afternoon. I think we'll make a start. So a very good afternoon to everyone joining us for today's webinar. The British Council for Offices Midlands NextGen Committee, quite a mouthful, are going to be presenting and discussing around colour trends as well as the influence of colour in our lives and the role of colour in creativity. I'll be introducing our speakers in just a moment. But if I can, we'd like to just flag a few events coming up through the year. And we'd encourage those of you joining us today to have a look at the BCO events page for further information. A few events coming up. The 20th of August, we've got a webinar on real estate startups. And on the 8th of September, a webinar on integrating social value into developments. Then into October 19th, 20th and 21st of October, we are hosting our BCO Awards lunches. Midlands is the 19th, London on the 20th and Northern on the 21st. This year is the first year that we're going virtual. So due to the current climate, we're doing virtual events, virtual awards lunches. So I think that'll be quite the spectacle in its own right. So we do hope that you can join us for that. So back to today's discussions, I'd like to introduce our speakers who you can hopefully see on screen. We've got Tony Wilkes, who is Brand Design Director and Senior Associate at Gensler. So welcome, Tony, and thanks for your time today. Really appreciate it. And also Donna Taylor, Principal Colour Consultant at PPG Architectural Coatings. So we're going to be splitting the presentation into two. Tony will be kicking things off, discussing the influence of colour in our lives and the role of colour in creativity. And then Donna will be presenting the eagerly awaited 2020 colour trends and also discussing the research behind the collation of those. So we'd planned this event as a live event a good few months back. We're thrilled that finally we can host this virtually. I think we'll have to pocket the networking opportunity and the beer tokens for our next physical event in the not too distant future, we hope. So timings wise, Tony hopefully speak for around 15 minutes, something like that, and then Donna around 30 minutes. Following that, propose some Q&A. So wrapping up within the hour on this Friday lunchtime. Please, as we go through, send your questions through to me and I'll look to field them at the end. If we can't get through all the questions, because there's quite a lot of subject matter, please feel free to forward any further questions or information that you require to events@bco.org.uk. We're going to be recording the event and it should be live in the next couple of weeks. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And I think at that point, I'll hand over to Tony from Gensler. Thanks ever so much, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Good afternoon, everybody. So I really wanted to kind of kick off before we get into the colour trends piece is to really think about the role of colour in our day-to-day. I'm fascinated with how colour plays a huge part in our lives, not only in terms of creativity and how we use it, but also how we kind of adapt that into our society. I think it's fascinating when you look at all the different aspects of how we utilise colour and the emotions those bring. You know, sometimes that goes unhidden and sometimes I think we take it for granted. But what I'd really like to do is kind of take you through some thoughts of, you know, starting from the beginning as we grow up and how we're introduced to colour and the kind of role that has, you know, through society and the different meanings and psychology of that. So if we could move to the next slide. What I'd like to talk about really is kind of really going back from the beginning almost to the start in terms of, you know, how civilizations have kind of experimented with colour and what that means to them. And we can still see some of those kind of philosophies standing today and kind of fast forwarding to almost like, you know, today in terms of what lessons are we learning when we're utilizing colour, not only within our creativity, but also how it kind of plays a key role in our lives. So just kind of mapping you from kind of the inception to almost modern day, and then, you know, thinking about what role that plays. So if we start at the beginning, almost, you know, back 40,000 years ago when prehistoric man existed, you know, we can start to see that colour played a huge role even back then when, you know, prehistoric man would mix iron-rich soil and mud to create the first impressions of colour. Now, whilst obviously colour then was quite limited, you know, it was still obviously well utilised in terms of expression and creativity, you know, through kind of modern day hieroglyphics. You know, some might even argue this is the modern day iconography or even graphic design in some expression. But we can even see back then that, you know, creativity and colour was being utilised even before we kind of understood or knew it. And then moving on to the idea of, you know, crushing insects and, you know, finding plants to squeeze in order to create certain dyes and paint, you know, was very much embedded in the culture of the day. So, you know, even going back to prehistoric times, we can start to see how colour played a role in our lives. To the next slide. And then moving on to fast forwarding a little bit, you know, in terms of how colour is informing civilization and start to act as almost like a symbolism for certain cultures or races. You know, looking at even the ancient Egyptians using mineral compounds to add colour to their art. You know, and we've seen on the news how colour can stand the test of time. You know, when we look at hieroglyphics, when we look at, you know, designs adorning tombs, you know, colour can still be vivid hundreds and thousands of years later. And also the symbolism of colour. You know, each has its own symbol, and especially within this culture where, you know, red was symbolizing the notion of life, but also evil and destruction, where, you know, blue was the notion of symbolizing fertility and rebirth and depicted water and heavens, to green symbolizing, you know, growth, life, and the afterlife and resurrection. So, you know, even back then again, color had a very deep-rooted meaning in terms of how people used it, what it meant for their culture, and how they were starting to express themselves. And then if we fast forward again, we go to the next slide, to the 1600s, you know, when we look at the principles that influence the modern day, you know, and looking at kind of Isaac Newton's color theory, it was really kind of our first understanding of a color spectrum by obviously refracting light through a prism. And some might say, obviously, you know, Isaac Newton was the kind of innovator of his time when he published his thoughts back in, you know, 1672. And also this started to kind of influence our kind of modern understanding of color that we still utilize today in terms of the spectrum that's utilized, you know, through our day-to-day creativity and also through art, design, and creative applications. So we'll go to the next slide. And as I say, you know, this notion of art, you know, and the color wheel, it's basically adopted by artists. You know, it's the color wheel that we still use in our day-to-day work from different creative sectors. Obviously, that wheel has kind of expanded a little bit, but it forms the basis of how we understand color and utilize it, and also, you know, the psychology of what that means. So much so that, you know, back in the 1700s, it started to influence creativity in a way where painters and artists were adopting this wheel in their palette to then create the artworks of the day that they did. And then moving on to the next page. So really that's kind of a snapshot of history. We can see how even from day one, the Big Bang, that color, you know, started to play a key role in culture, our lives and society. But, you know, we fast forward to kind of the start of our own color journey, kind of what does that mean? What's the next page? You know, if we think back even to our primary day schools and growing up as children, you know, even though we're introduced to color at those early days, there's obviously a certain naivety of how we actually utilize and understand color. But the great thing about that is actually we don't have any preconceptions of the meaning or psychology of color. It's actually used as a form of kind of self-expression from different individuals. And we only start to really kind of get influenced and have opinions about color as we grow up and we're kind of opened and experience different things within our lives. And next one. So much so that, you know, this is a snapshot of my childhood where, you know, growing up in the 70s and 80s, is that, I think we start to get influenced by color early on, maybe in our kind of teen years, where we're starting to look at kind of brands, we're looking at what we were and the colors we like and our favorite color that might be associated to, a football team, the brands that we utilize within our childhood, the car that your dad drove and you always remember the color of that car, even to, recreational activities of bikes and things like that. So I think, we start to form a notion of color, an opinion of color as we kind of move on with our lives and grow. But again, these are all, fond memories of actually how we start to think about color in a way that we could potentially start to influence our modern day in terms of how we utilize them in our creative applications within our sector. That's the next page. And then really talking about color psychology. And really, does color really kind of define who we are and our behaviors? And, it's no great surprise that brands are very savvy in terms of how they utilize color in terms of its meaning and its connection to how we actually respond to that brand. And also looking at kind of product recognition, we all understand or know, the deep purple of Cadbury's. And it's really this notion of how color can really be associated to a brand in terms of how you connect with it and what it means to you, but also the kind of memories you create with it. So it's very interesting that, while we're thinking of brands that we take for granted day to day, they're utilizing color in a way of obviously informing you about who they are, what they do, how they sell, what products they offer, and what experiences they offer as well. So then really thinking about color influence and creativity in kind of modern society. And I find it, again, fascinating that I think sometimes we take this for granted in a way, in terms of how people really respond to color and how they can not only feel part of it or connected to it, but the different guises that takes. So move to the next slide. Obviously, color can be used as a form of self-expression, kind of to define who we are and who we want to be, but also the perception we want to give to others. What's our stance on the world? How do we want to express who we are and our personality? And, what kind of stands us out from the rest? From going back again from tribal days of using face paints to modern day makeup, or whether utilizing color as a part of a movement or a sense of belonging to something. So again, it's very powerful in terms of even how we utilize color from individual expression to form a perception of how we want to portray ourselves to others. And then even looking at, culture being embedded in religion. So, we all understand and know the Holy Festival. And again, this notion of it being a festival of spring, a festival of colors, a festival of love. It denotes this arrival of spring and the end of winter. So it's really, color can be embedded to mean lots of different things to lots of different people, especially when we think about its cultural application. And when we're thinking about color within culture, the nuances of what that means from, red being lucky in China to symbolize fertility, to green being a sacred color in Islam to represent the Prophet Muhammad. So color can be very powerful in the way people understand it and how it's adopted in religion. And also this notion of color adoption. I think it's fascinating how people can adopt a sense of colors or palette to represent a symbol of sexuality. We all understand that, the rainbow combination of colors that starts to represent this notion of unity and solidarity, where people can feel part or feel a sense of belonging to a set of colors. And I think, in a way, colors can be very iconic, in turn kind of creating a global sense of ownership as well. So again, the impact of color and the scale of color across the world can be utilized in a way where people feel this kind of sense of ownership. to the next slide. Sorry, one previous. And then, ultimately, we've all been through tricky times over the last 6 months. And I think, it's been really fascinating when you look at, how do we use colour as a means of showing solidarity and unity? A means of showing hope through times of need. And we all recognise the rainbow, again, by showing a selective group of colours that, again, communicate this notion of kind of support or togetherness. And also that the great thing about that is it's actually started to encourage creativity in our homes. So with anyone with children, you would have seen them painting this, at the kitchen table and applying that into windows within our communities, again, to show a sense of community. So colour can be adopted at any age and also have very different meanings in the way of kind of bringing people together, but also kind of showing solidarity and unity in times of need. And then lastly, really thinking about actually colour in scale. So when we think about colour and its nuance, how can colour play a role in the urban fabric of our cities and in the world? And, I think we've all probably come across the I Love New York brand by Milton Glaser, where he uses the red heart to symbolize a love for a place, right? But if you think about colours that are utilized within our cities, they can have iconic status, so we all understand, the yellow cab of New York or the red telephone box of London, or even down to, the yellow Selfridges bag. Colour plays a part at every minutiae, at every step of our lives, from small to large scale, and can become iconic in its own sense. Even to the notion of the colours used in Harry Beck's underground map, that's become an icon for the world in terms of how people utilise colour as part of a navigational system. So it's really thinking about how colour really kind of plays a key part in our society, how it really has influenced us from day one. In sometimes we kind of take that for granted, but also, how colour can really play a key part in how we respond to it, how it's become emotive, how we react to it, our own opinions of colour formed by our childhood. And actually, how did that start to influence how we kind of work today, and also how we start to utilise that in creativity. And with that, I'm kind of wrapped up. So really just a kind of brief history and introduction of colour use, but now kind of handing over to Donna to talk about the colour trends for this year.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Tony. That's a fantastic intro. Really interesting. Thank you. Donna, if I may hand over to you, that'd be fab. Thank you.
Great stuff. So I'll just share my screen. And I'm just going to stop video and remove myself so it's not distracting. Can you all see that?
Looks good, Donna. Perfect.
Excellent. Great stuff. So thanks everybody for joining us today. It's really appreciated. I just want to welcome you to our presentation by PPG, which is Flow. It's our 2020 overarching trend story. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to share with you things that we consider when we're planning for our Global Trends Workshop, and how we can tap into a certain kind of energy that we refer to as flow, and how it can connect to our 3 trend stories this year, which are on the move, at the core, and in the know. So the Global Colour Workshop is an annual event. It's held in America and usually takes about 3 days. Sometimes it stretches into 5, but more often than not, it can be covered over in 3 days. But what's interesting about this workshop is that we actually use a full year of preparation to undertake this workshop. And the international group actually only started with just 3 colour stylists back in 2008. And with it, they brought a selection of magazines, Pinterest culled images and colour studies across multiple industries. And then along with a healthy dose of opinions, we explored and aligned on just 3 colour palettes. So this is the 2020 colour stylist team now. Big difference from just the 3 people. And in the run up to the workshop, we personally attend as many design, automotive and consumer electronics shows and conferences so that we can share the collected data throughout everybody who's in the team. And because PPG is an industry member of WGSN, which is the world's leading fashion and consumer trend forecasting service. So the colour stylists come from around 11 countries. This sits within North America, Europe and Asia. It makes the team quite diverse in their colour knowledge and their experiences. And working in both commercial and residential market sectors, the stylists are specifying colours for the things that you use every day. So if you think about the car that you drive, the appliances in your homes, and electronics such as mobile phones, headphones, laptops, and much, much more. So the information is studied intensely, and we use that to create many design boards, colour samples, and various other materials. And then we align the most relevant data that impacts colour and design directions for the next couple of years. And what's interesting is the automotive business provides a unique forecasting ability where it will work 5 years in advance. And this might not translate to what will be on our walls in 5 years, but what it does do, it gives us a really good, unique perspective on consumer preferences. So we gravitate to different colours at different points in our lives, and this is based on demographics, lifestyle interests, and societal influences. So for example, why do we like the camouflage green that has been trending this year? Well, this particular green with a hint of blue is a result of society wanting to be more in touch with nature. They're wanting more to blend in with the outdoors. And then there's the feeling of wanting to be reassured and protected, which takes on a military element. And then fashion influences the home decor. And we customise the runway directions to resonate with what customers want to see in hotels, retail, healthcare, and in their homes as well. But fashion doesn't always translate to what works in the home and on the walls. So then we have to look at the textile market, because it's important to know what colours are then coming through in fabrics and furniture and window treatments and accessories. And then we tap into the tile, wood and metal markets, because all of these markets then pull from the same big trends bucket, which determine their colours, their textures and their stories, because we actually influence as much as trends can influence us. So in order for colours to resonate and connect with us, to help drive us to make a purchase, they have to reflect us. So what is happening in society and what's happening inside of us, knowing that and understanding it makes the paint selections a lot more relevant. So these are the macro trends that we've researched. We break that down and then we sort it into relevant data to reflect what the colour trend stories are going to bring. So in addition to that, there is 3 major forces that are changing and reshaping our world, and it's having a huge impact on our future. And these are technology, climate and globalisation. And it's happening at such a speed that we're finding ourselves in a place where we can no longer keep up with this, and it's leaving us feeling a little overwhelmed and a bit left behind as these changes begin to escalate out of our controls. So a new phase will start with a return to the self and a degree of introspection. Personal responsibilization is key, and integration of ideas rather than opposition is a necessary cause of action to help us find a new and better path. So it's not about thinking inside the box or outside the box, it's about asking if or why we even need that box for thinking in the first place, because the solutions are never at the same level as the problems. So here's an example of action points that we can actually undertake to help move forward in a reimagined future within the design industry. So this is all about merging sustainability with technology and human connection. So Architecture Studio Bureau SLA teamed up with a spatial design agency to reinvent how plastics can be recycled. So the company is called Pretty Plastic Plant. It's based in Amsterdam, and it's a recycling factory that has the technology to transform plastic waste into building materials. So the image in this slide is a bank which is located on the corner of a really busy junction in Japan. And it has a frequent movement of cars, bicycles and people all around it. So the facade of this building has been designed to be rhythmical so that it changes expression as people see it from the different angles as they merge in front of it or behind it or alongside it. And the colours and flowers and trees then appear in and out from these floating cubes, playing kind of like a rainbow melody. So the idea is that this melody will then spread happiness and comfort to visitors and to people within that local community. So designing, delivering and managing spaces that make us happy and improve our well-being requires a shift in focus and priority. It requires us to go a step further. We need to think about how designs will affect the people inside of the buildings and the buildings around that one. So one of the ways that we are seeing well-being put at the heart of design considerations is the movement in biophilic design. So this is an emerging field that aims to restore our connection with nature. And biophilia literally means a love of life or living things. So it's more about bringing the outdoor elements inside. It can be practiced in many different ways through incorporating the use of natural materials, colours, patterns. It can include improving indoor air quality, ventilation, whilst also allowing for natural lighting and acoustic comforts. So this slide's about showing examples of how design can then be used to explore the human connection along with technology. So neuroaesthetic design and the impact it has on health and well-being is explored alongside devices which can assist in mindfulness and relaxation. So Google used these sensors to measure physical and physiological responses, which explored how different visuals can impact our health and well-being. They have a smartphone-free installation, which explores the impact of neuroaesthetic design and how varying light, sounds, scents and textures can actually have an impact on us. So visitors were given wristbands with sensors during a research exploration. It measured physical and physiological responses to each of 3 rooms that they entered. And then it customized the report detailing how they felt in each of those spaces. And then Samsung Resonance Exhibition explored the interactions between people, objects and technology. So installations with iridescent lighting illuminated a maze-like space and reacted and transformed in response to each visitor's breathing, talking or movement. So having tapped into how technology, human connection and sustainable design can support new ideas within design, we're now going to take a look at how this translates into the colour design trends. So our trend title this year is Flow. The overarching mood is one of movement, energy and hope. The previous 2 years have seen darker colours within the trend palettes, but this year the mood is definitely coming through as turning more towards a bigger, bolder colour. So these are our 3 trend stories. The next few slides will outline who they are, the importance of the connection that we've made between them. But it's important to know at this point that each of these trend stories are portrayed using psychology and personality types. So this is the connection that we made between the research, the stories and the human requirements to enable us to integrate change to enable a more stable lifestyle. So it's about letting a flow of energy circulate between structures, systems and perceptions. So each of our trend stories are linked to 3 touch points that we can undertake to allow changes to take place. So this is the mind, the body and the spirit paradigm, and they're used to mesh perspectives. These are the three themes altogether. They're intended to suit certain personality types. They each include an influential mood, as well as many different materials, effects, and various design styles. So our first trend story is on the move, and this is action by the body. So if you think detox, fortifying, preventing, it's about using technology-assisted well-being to enhance exercise, relaxation, and sleep, etc. So the emphasis is on creativity, a more is more approach. And the personality type is likely to be self-confident. They'll love to mix and match colour, and particularly colours that wouldn't normally work together. And they don't particularly care what others think about their choices because they believe in a joyful creativity and they're not afraid to break the codes. So the colour palette is a mix of vibrant and fresh saturated hues. And we're paying particular attention with this palette to 3 yellows because this is popular within interiors at the moment. And being one of the most visible colours on the spectrum, yellow is connected with optimism and inquisitiveness. And warm hues of yellow can evoke a sensation of natural light, whilst being attention-seeking, intense and powerful. So they fit this trend palette perfect. The mood is a desire for a mix and mismatch effect. It's about remaking and reusing and reblending influences. It's about borrowing from the past to create a new modern outlook. Contours and shapes appear simple, but they're also solid. And they come in handcrafted techniques that create a fun and playful rule-breaking effect. The second trend story is at the core. This is action by the spirit, suggesting strong links with emotion. And well-being is actually at the forefront with this palette because this is about connection. It's about being grounded and seeking a more purposeful life. So the emphasis is on balance with a less is more approach. And in praise of sustainability and quality, personality types for this theme will look for a state of balance. They'll spend less time with an increasing focus on what feels good, and they'll prioritize responsibility and conscious consumption, and probably choose products and services with a purpose and demand quality on longevity. So their design styles will lean toward the biophilic design we spoke about earlier, and with a more of natural and spiritual element. So the colour palette in this trend is comforting and nostalgic, and that's in particular with the muted midtones. Bright colours will feel rich, whilst the neon pastels will double as tinted neutrals. The mood is about taking ideas from the softer side of Mother Nature. The direction is respectful, it's botanical, and it's also sustainable. And because sustainability is key within this trend, the particular focus will be on reusable, natural and eco-friendly materials. So we're looking at cork, bamboo pulp and woods that can offer a warmer finish. And the importance here with this trend is that it does kind of instill a purpose first approach. So products will be created with a function in mind first. And our third trend story is in the know. This is actioned by the mind with a focus on reflection. It's about being calm and focused, having a decluttered lifestyle and maybe a tech-led work-life balance. So the emphasis is on knowledge. Good is generally better. So in praise of contribution and innovation, this personality type will honour art, design, science and tradition. And they'll appear eager to change society and contribute to make the future a better place than the past and also the present as well. So the colour palette for this trend contain cool, rich shades. They're generally darker, they're a little more earthier tones, but the contrast lovely with warm and brighter tones. And the soft greys and warm beiges appear more organic looking and naturally weathered. And the orange and terracotta tones have a raw and earthy appeal as well. So the mood is about futuristic aesthetics, and this is combined with nature-inspired forms to explore materials, tactility and finishes. Furniture and lighting fuse natural and retro futuristic looks by embracing texture, tactile surfaces, tactile surface reliefs and lines to generate optical illusions. And linear geometric patterns and hard-edged industrial forms inspire furniture and lighting pieces. So, having heard the trend stories and seeing the 3 colour palettes, we're now going to take a look at how these trend themes could potentially work within office design. So it's, it's all over the place at the moment. The coronavirus has undoubtedly affected the way we are currently working. We're looking now toward a more permanent move to remote working or negotiating toward flexible working. So it's within my belief that the future of our design input will be impacted by this. And this is because designers are now going to have to face creating environments that respect each individual's personal spaces, one-way systems to avoid build-up of human traffic, products that likely need to have antibacterial properties or withstand excessive cleaning regimes. So design requirements are now potentially going to have to include placing people at the heart of the design, offering choice where a single solution is no longer possible, allowing for flexibility in the use of the environment, and providing buildings and environments that are convenient and enjoyable for people to use and for everyone. So how can colour actually support these new ways of working within these new environments? So then we'll look toward zoning in open plan working spaces, because this is more than ever crucial now. It's about giving clear non-verbal cues that can prompt social distancing, clean desking and hygiene behaviours, because these behaviours are more likely to become ingrained in working culture now. And colour leads people intuitively within a well-designed, playful setting. So taking cues from, but not replicating design styles, allows us to play with cultural colour symbolism. And this is to evoke similar moods from the time without becoming a pastiche of the era. Blue, for example, is known for its communicative qualities. And when it becomes a little bit lighter and a little bit greener, it can take on more of a creative futurism that can foster innovation. And by inverting our preconceptions of using more grounded colours on the floor, the nutmeg then becomes all the more subversive and characterful on the wall spaces. And imagining a new normal now, the working environment where people need to come together on just a temporary basis, we now need to recognise the need to dial up a rapid sense of belonging and an identity for these spaces. So colour can offer the more simplistic of wayfinding signals. People can identify and retain a lot quicker. But this is not something that's new. We know that it's been around for quite a while. References toward colour psychology has been used for quite some time, but we can actually take this one step further now by trying to capture colour elements from local areas, for example, and this will amplify more of a sense of space and the place, and adjusting the nuance to brand the space or signify the activity that's going to take place in that space will help massively in them designs. So just looking at commercial properties, particularly within urbanisations, because these are going to become more affordable and available post-pandemic. Creative industries are expected to fill a void now left by corporations, and these spaces as retrofits may not be in the most inspiring of light. Locations are usually surrounded by structural steel and greyness. Irregularity in organic forms and mixed materials can add complexity to a space to avoid the enervating effects of this visual monotony. So by creating a central focal point within the area, using humanisation and illuminating and uplifting colours like that of Sweet Sheba and Artisan Well contained in this image, it actually draws positivity to the heart of the working environment. So colour directions may see pinks, peach and nude tones appearing, and this is due to having comforting properties. These colours can induce feelings of kindness and protection and nurture, and they can also create a mood that offers warmth and reassurance to the users, particularly in these uncertain times. Greens, they're also quite prominent in design, and this is due to the biophilic trend. And it's mainly because these are balanced, they're organic and they're restful, and they have an ability to actually connect us with the outside world. And these are ideal for your high-rise office blocks, what, you know, doesn't have much of a view or doesn't, you know, have the feeling of space and outdoor environment. And then blues. These are mentally stimulating, so these are ideal for office environment, particularly where concentration and clear thinking is needed. And it's one of the few colours that is versatile enough to be pastel or saturated or even neutral, but in large proportions, and it still won't strain, distract or disrupt that space. So just to sum up, colour is more than an aesthetic for the final stages of a design scheme. It's fundamental to the way we can understand the world, and understanding how to use this opens creative design opportunities that can resonate with the users of your spaces. So for me, colour is the future to connect, unite and build a better tomorrow for everyone. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Donna. Fantastic. Superb. So feel free, those on the call, the participants joining us, to fire through any questions that you have at this point. So Tony kicked things off today with how colour influences our lives and the role on creativity, and then Donna covering the 2020 colour trends. I thought it was very interesting how Tony made a link to colour. So initially, colour is used by us as a mark making exercise. So we're not so much in tune to what colour suits us, but it's just the mark making, and then through life we're selecting colour and drawing colour that suits us and aligns with us. So I thought that was an interesting concept that I hadn't really considered before, how at first it's a mark making tool, and then we align to certain colours as we carry through. Tony, from your experience of working with companies and applying colour within space in terms of brand, I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more about that process perhaps, and how brands align with colour, and then how we may see that in workplace. I know that Donna's covered applying colour from an interiors point of view. I wonder if you could talk for maybe just a minute or two on how brand and colour are pulled through a workplace as you see it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a few different aspects to that. You know, within our work, typically we are working with inherent palettes that obviously represent the palette of the company. So it's really about how do we start to use colour as a means within the space to serve very different functions, and also to represent different space types. So if we took a brand palette, for example, you know, how do we use colour as a means of navigation? You know, how do we use colour as a means of a focal point to a space? How do we use colour to connect transitional spaces together? You know, how do we use colour as a backdrop to a conversation in breakout areas? And there's different forms that could take, whether that's kind of big blocks of colour, I think like Donna had in some of her examples, which really create kind of impact, or whether we use colour in a way that becomes a little bit more subtle and almost like the lining of a suit, right? I like to kind of describe it as. So there's nuances and scales of colour that we kind of think about. But also within our work, it's really about how we use colour that kind of creates a response for employees and clients that are visiting that particular office. And also, you know, what are we trying to communicate from a brand perspective when we're utilising colour in terms of how that could potentially engage in many different ways and enhance the culture of that brand. And in some instances, obviously, we're creating brands from scratch, where we're actually creating our own palettes that kind of represent that brand. And that's delivered through key strategic thinking with workshops with clients at the front end of projects, where we're discussing positioning and narrative and communications. And then from that, we'll then draw out a palette that references that strategy that client wants to communicate. And again, just thinking about where we're utilizing palettes that we've created ourselves to ensure that they have a bit of longevity, they have flexibility in application, they can be used at scale, they can be used in different nuances, whether that's through the various tones or tints. So again, thinking about when we're applying color within a space, how do we maintain the longevity of what that color means, and how we can actually utilize it in different ways to kind of stay fresh, I think.
Thanks, Tony. That's great, fantastic. And Donna, to the subjects that you spoke on, I think it sounds as if we're moving to palettes that are more hopeful. That perhaps before COVID, things were maybe, I don't know, a bit too serious, and it's quite reassuring, I guess, especially on a Friday afternoon, that things are sounding hopefully more positive. You spoke of more movement, more energy, more hope. There's a vibrancy in the colours selected, and also maybe a reflection again on the products and the spaces that we're creating. So this idea of things being more handcrafted, a purpose to things. So if we're creating a product, then there's a reason for it. There's a sustainability message, and then you touched on as well the aspects of well-being and bringing that back in, and mindfulness. That I guess at this point in time we're all being put under more pressure, and the work-life balance is kind of being compressed together. So it's I think it's reassuring personally, and I'm sure for hopefully those on the call as well, that there's a lot of hope coming through, and it's being reflected in the color palettes. Don, I don't know, we did speak about this. So we've done 2020, and obviously that's going to keep progressing and moving on. Is there any hint to the way the color trends may move in the future? And now I know that the research is being carried out for the future, and not too much can be said on that, but do you feel that the trajectory that we're on now, the vibrancy, the brightness, the vivid tones will continue? Is that the path you feel that we'll be taking?
Yeah, I think because the trends tend to overlap. So the current trend story that we've seen today is 2020, but can overlap by about 6 months into 2021. And the 2021 trends can overlap into 2022. So there is always going to be just kind of like a slight shift on colour, where you may see a repeat. So I believe that we're going to see more softer colours, just because of how people are feeling at the moment. Everything's so uncertain, and there's concerns and there's fear. So people are going to want to feel more comforted and protected, I think. So I'm definitely thinking that the softer side of colours, but then also there's got to be a good balance, because on the other side of that, you're going to have kind of personality types what want something to make them feel more happy, a little bit more vibrant, just to kind of come away from all the unrest and uncertainty. So I think it kind of tips the scales on balance, really. It'll be a mix of both, but I think the shift for comfort purposes will shift more to muted tones, I think.
Okay.
Soft colours. There's still some strong colours there.
Great. So we'd had a question through from Phil. I'll read it out, and this is to Donna. So Phil asks, how do we think that office interiors will respond to the need to create hopeful and positive tones for multi-generational occupants?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, isn't it? Thanks, Phil.
don't know how to answer that really.
I wonder if the question is around a split. So I wonder if the question is that are different generations requiring a different type of color palette, and how in an office that is now multi-generational, although we try not to categorize people when we design an office into generations, do different generations require a different palette of colors? I wonder if the question's leading that way. Have you seen any of that in your research, that a particular generation require a certain palette or respond better to a certain palette than others?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the on the move trend tends to, I don't want to sound ageist here, but it could potentially fit the younger generation. But the only thing with that is, interestingly, while we're doing the research for this, is we found as well that we were seeing more of an ageless society coming through, and that's they're more older people, but they don't actually look older. They're quite trendy. They've got disposable incomes because you know, they may be retired, and they well, it's kind of like, yeah, a shift on both. That palette fits the younger generation, but also I think there's quite a lot of older people that still want to be trendy. So I don't think yeah, office environments are going to be. I think in the way with that, for a younger generation office environments, they tend to lean toward this more like kind of hip style of office, where they will work individually in kits, kind of like a coffee shop or a hotel lobby, or if that makes sense.
It does. It does. I think that's helpful. Thank you. And there's a question from Danny Palmer. Hi, Danny. So he's saying, with a balanced office and home working environment, do the colours we choose at home, are they to be the same or different to the office? And perhaps that's a question to both of you. Tony, I don't know if you want to kick that off first, and then over to Donna.
It's a really interesting point, actually, because, you know, our own homes are a reflection of our own personalities and the colours we actually choose to paint our walls and the colour we use in our furniture. And I think with the work-life balance now, I think brands or savvy brands will be thinking about actually how do you transport some of their own brand personality that you used to get in the office space back into the home. And I think, you know, if employees are now looking to actually work more on a flexi-time basis or work more at home, you know, I think there's this really interesting connection of how you portray a brand's aesthetic and palette with actually within your own home as well, you know. So you kind of create the connection between the culture, between your own home and on the office space, but also still feel a sense of belonging, even though you're still working kind of remotely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Donna, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it really depends on the type of job that you're doing. If your job is, well, if you can work from home, obviously, your job's likely to be more mentally stimulating than physical. So I would probably say that you may still need a little bit of escapism, because even though you're working at home, you kind of still have to feel like you are at work, but then be able to relax from your working time as well. So yeah, I think it is important that, you know, the colours chosen just right for that environment. It could be symbolic to just having one space in the house that you have purely for that working time, which could be painted, you know, coloured in more positive and active colours to try and help stimulate and keep you motivated. Is probably what I would attempt to do.
It's really interesting because, you know, individuals' preference of colour is very different, right? So we'll all like different colours on this course for any reason. And to try and distill that to a unified colour that works for everybody and then replicate that either in the office or at home would be very difficult. But maybe that's the notion of personalisation in office, you know, where, you know, you could potentially look at how employees engage with colour and what it means, but also how it makes them feel depending on what space type they're working in.
Sure. That's great. Fantastic. Well, I think we're pretty much at time, so I'd just like to recap the couple of events we've got coming up. We have 2 more webinars, 20th of August, real estate startups, which I think will be really interesting, and then the 8th of September, integrating social value into developments. I think we've kind of heard a little bit on that on the call today on the on our webinar about social value and a more buoyant, uplifting feel to things going forward. So it sounds like a similar themes carrying through there. My thanks again to Tony Wilkes, so brand design director at Gensler, and also a huge thanks to Donna Taylor, principal colour consultant at PPG. Again, we've discussed this presentation for quite a few months now. I'm thrilled that we've managed to do it, even if it were virtual. Thanks ever so much for joining, Donna. Tony, thanks for your time this afternoon. Thanks to the BCO for setting this all up for us. And also a huge thanks to everyone joining us this Friday afternoon. If there are any further questions, please fire them through events@bco.org.uk. And I think that's it. Have a fantastic afternoon, everyone. And look forward to chatting with you all in the near future. Thanks ever so much, and bye for now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.